Welcome to This Must Be the Place. I'm your host, Alo Galinsky. Each week, I'll uncover what's happening in Sonoma County, diving into the hidden gems and quirky corners. I'll be interviewing some of our local legends, as well as people you didn't know you need to know, all through the eyes of a craft beer enthusiast living in wine country. Join me as we explore one sip, one story, and one adventure at a time, and together we'll find out why this must be the place.
Today's guest represents something bigger than beer. Russian River Brewing Company isn't just a brewery, it's a part of Sonoma County's cultural fabric. It has helped shape the identity of this region as a destination for craftsmanship, innovation, and community, and this conversation about to take place is deeply special and personal for me. Back in 2019, I worked at Russian River Brewing as a tour guide for 8 amazing months, meeting so many fantastic people, continuing my beer education journey, and getting to soak in the culture of all things Russian River, including working a Pliny the Younger release rush. And Pliny the Younger isn't just hype. It's a pilgrimage, ritual, and seasonality. Every year, people travel from across the world to stand in line, share a pint, and participate in something that feels uniquely rooted in this place. My guest today is Vinnie Cilurzo, co-owner and director of brewery operations of Russian River Brewing Company, who alongside his wife Natalie helped build one of the most respected, well-known, and revered names in craft beer. Pliny the Younger is released each year for a limited window, and in 2026, that window runs from March 20th through April 2nd. It will be available on tap and in bottles at Russian River's Santa Rosa and Windsor pubs, rain or shine. Today, we'll talk about how all this began, how a local brewery became a global pilgrimage site, and how beer can reflect the character of a place and the people who call it home. Welcome, Vinnie.
Thanks for having me. Sorry Natalie couldn't be here, but like you said, we're right up against getting into our Pliny the Younger release, and her part is really the big focus right now, and that's getting everything together, whether it's wristbands to porta potties to this, that, or the other thing. So
all
anyways.
The engines that make it move. Well, we'll miss Natalie on this conversation, but I'm so thrilled to have you as a guest on This Must Be the Place. It's been really great getting to know you over the years, having been an employee of you and running to you at beer festivals and conferences kind of all around the United States. And we always like to start at the very beginning of things here on our episodes. So why don't we start where beer first grabbed you? And was there a moment when this went from passion to life's work?
Well, I grew up in a winery in Southern California. So, as all winemakers know, there's a lot of beer consumed around a winery. And so obviously there wasn't, microbrewed beer back then, but certainly this beer called Henry Weinhardt's that I remember that my folks would drink, and some of the other coworkers around the winery. And that was kind of an early version of a microbrewed craft beer, because it was brewed with Cascade hops, and I'm not even sure if it's still around. But anyways, that was like early, but more to the point of what, we know microbrewed craft beer. That would definitely probably be Liberty Ale was, kind of a beer that first grabbed me. And I started homebrewing when I was 19 years old, and I had a couple roommates who were really into beer. So, it was beers like Anchor Liberty Ale, Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, Pete's Wicked Ale, which doesn't exist anymore. Certainly Sam Adams, Boston Lager, all those beers. Well, Liberty Ale isn't around right now, but, Anchor is hopefully getting back on their feet again. But, Boston Beer and Sierra Nevada are certainly giant breweries now, and in the day, those, were uber hoppy beers, and now they'd probably be considered or are considered a little pedestrian, but in the sense that that's what hoppy beer was. So I was home brewing IPAs though, but those were the beers I was drinking commercially.
So IPAs and hobby beers, it sounds like that was kind of your first love in terms of beer styles.
Yeah, it always was, and it's something that I really gravitated to pretty early on, probably within my third or fourth homebrew. I'm pretty sure my roommate Dennis and I were homebrewing IPAs. We go out to a little homebrew shop. This was in San Diego when I lived down there and was going to school. We'd go to this little homebrew shop out in El Cajon, so East San Diego, and they even had experimental hops back then, which is something we're pretty known to be tinkering in with pretty regularly. And the one I remember the most was this hop that was CFJ4 and CFJ90. And CFJ 90 went on to become Centennial hops. So I was actually homebrewing with Centennial before it even had a name. So that was pretty cool.
Before Centennial was cool, you have Vinny tinkering around with it in his homebrew shop.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
really awesome.
I like CFJ4 better. I remember it being even more impactful, but for whatever reason, it didn't make it.
Let's talk about when you and Natalie were setting up to start Russian River and what that original conceit was kind of like. Were you trying to build something in particular? And is it different from today's reality?
Russian River was actually Russian River Brewing was actually originally started by Corbel champagne cellars back in 1997. So it was an idea that a couple of the winemakers had out there. They were opening a deli, which is still there on the property of Corbel, some of the best food out in West County, and a great place to stop if you're on your way to Armstrong Woods or what have you. And so the winemakers had this idea that they presented to Gary Heck, the owner, to add a brewery in the mix because they were going to have draft beer. And that's eventually how Russian River Brewery got started. They needed someone to run the brewery for them. I had just sold my part in Blind Pig, which was the first brewery I was involved with down in Southern California. And if your listeners know, our main IPA, other than Pliny the Elder, is Blind Pig. So our standard single IPA, if you will, is called Blind Pig. And so I got hired on at Corbel to run the brewery for them. And after 6 or 7 years, they decided to get out of the beer business. And so I traded my severance package for the Russian River name, along with a few other brand names, which included a couple of the Belgian beers we make now, but probably most important was Pliny the Elder, which we had already brewed. And it was in 2003 that I wound things down at Corbel. And then it took a year, and Natalie and I raised money, and we've got the pub open. What most people know us for is that our pub in Santa Rosa, in downtown Santa Rosa on 4th Street. And that opened in the spring of 2004. And so at the time, it was just us carrying on what Russian River was at Corbel and just being scrappy and holding our breath. Some days nobody would show up for lunch, literally. We could run the pub with one bartender. At the time, Natalie and I had two other operating partners, but we quickly bought them out within the first year or two. And then it was really just down to Natalie and I. But we opened with, I think, 28 employees, only $6,000 in the bank, and we were behind in rent by 6 months. So we didn't start out for what people think of Russian River as often being busy. It was definitely a struggle. Natalie and I didn't pay ourselves for the first couple years. Things started to pick up, and then by 2008, we opened a production brewery off-site, and that helped grow our distribution. But again, it became a financial struggle. We stopped paying ourselves again, and eventually bought out all of our investors. And the ethos and values that we live by and that we let guide the way we run our brewery, a lot of that was driven by just things that happened. We didn't sit down and consciously write a mission statement or whatever, or anything like that. They're just the ways that we wanted to run our business. And then as we grew the business, we were able to incorporate the things that we wanted into our business. And, once we built the Windsor brewery, we were really able to start putting in a lot of the things in place that we'd always dreamt of, things that were maybe some value driven, some ethos, some just because it's what we wanted to do, it's the right thing to do, relating to, say, like sustainability. All the water that goes through the brewery drains. We have our own wastewater treatment plant here in Windsor, so we do a whole pre-treatment on all the wastewater from the brewery effluent, not from the toilets or anything, of course. And then that water goes through a whole filtration cycle process that we then bring that water back into the building, and that's all of the cleaning water. So all the water that we clean our tanks with in here is all reclaimed water from our wastewater treatment plant. We can capture the steam off the kettle stack and run it through a vapor condenser to preheat brewing water. The most basic things that all breweries do is recapture the heat off the heat exchanger that cools the wort down, and then recapture that water and the heat from the hot side of the wort, and that preheats the cool water that cools the wort down, the unfermented beer. All the spent grain goes to local farmers, spent yeast, spent dry hops, all those things, go out to either be fed to animals or composted. And probably the most recent sustainability move is CO2 recovery. So
Mm.
we're now capturing almost all of our carbon dioxide that blows off from fermentation. So fermentation is a process where the yeast eats the sugar turns to alcohol, and the byproduct is carbon dioxide. So that CO2 normally just blows off into a bucket. And that's what most breweries and wineries do. But there is the ability to capture that CO2. And it's something Natalie and I had planned and dreamt about doing from the beginning of when we built the Windsor Brewery, which was in October 2018 when we opened. It took us 7 years to get to the point where we could do it, but now 100% of our beer is carbonated with our own CO2 that we've captured, cleaned, and put back in the tank. So the way that we run our business has just evolved in time and has just happened naturally and organically. And they've just fallen into place where they are ethos and kind of values driven focuses. And more recently, a new brand that we just came out with, maybe you've had Russian River 110.
Oh, yeah.
It's a West Coast Pills. And so we've committed to, in perpetuity, to make a donation off each batch to the Russian River Keeper, which is a local nonprofit that watches over and keeps the Russian River clean. And that's where almost everyone's water in Sonoma County comes from, is from the Russian River. Either, I mean, it's from the river that then feeds off into, wells and aquifers and whatnot. So very important part of our world of being in Sonoma County. It's just a perfect partnership between the Russian River Keeper and Russian River Brewery.
Well, it certainly sounds like you all do a lot to make sure the sustainability efforts are there. And for any of our listeners out there who have taken a brewery tour before, maybe walked through some of those fermentation vessels where you see those little buckets that are underneath the tanks and bubbling up with something, you won't see any of that. I mean, you won't walk through them at Russian River anyway, but you won't see any of that if you do spy them at Russian River, because you guys are now recapturing your own CO2. That's definitely a change since I was there, and that's fascinating to kind of hear about. So
Yeah,
good on
yeah,
you.
that started. The first day of capture was July 23rd, 2025. And so what we're now March 2026, we've captured about 325,000 pounds of
Wow.
CO2. So it's pretty significant. It's pretty cool. In fact, we have so much CO2 that we take it to Santa Rosa, and all the CO2 we use in Santa Rosa is from Windsor. And we've actually sold some to a local brewery, and we've got a shipment that we're going to sell to a broker outside the area as well.
Well, I've learned something new. There are CO2 black markets out there. Maybe not black markets, but you can go to a CO2 broker. That's fascinating. Another side product and byproduct of the beer industry that I'm learning about from one of the masters himself. Now, you talked a little bit about, developing this ethos and culture around how you intentionally built the brewery. You want to give us a couple words to describe the culture inside Russian River, and has it evolved at all since you opened your doors at your pub?
Yeah, it definitely has. I mean, from the beginning, we were just trying to survive, to be honest. I mean, like I said, you have a lunch where nobody comes in. First customer maybe rolls in at 4 or 5 o'clock for a beer, for a happy hour beer. That's definitely, a struggle financially. So back in the early days, it was just us trying to, get by. And then, as the business gets stronger, we get on our feet, we grow distribution and whatnot. We start to be able to lay in some of these, ideas and things that we want to, encompass and be about. And a lot of that comes down to employees believing in it and living it and basically executing it beyond it being just from Natalie and I. It's through the employees themselves, whether it's a sustainability measure. Or perfect example is one of our head brewer recently penciled out that if we added a second baler, so we already had one cardboard or plastic baler, if we added a second one, we could, start baling, have one for plastic and one for cardboard. It helps us side stream a lot more of our recycled goods instead of them just going into a generic blue dumpster that then our local municipality or local, trash company deals with. We deal with it on our end. It actually, in the end, saves us a bunch of money that way, but it also makes it more streamlined. So, there's a perfect example of where not only are we doing the right thing for the environment and whatnot through sustainability, but it's actually saving us a pretty good chunk of money as well each year.
That doesn't hurt, especially in today's
No.
world of beer and the economy.
Yeah, and
Now,
that's where these things often, you don't think of it as paying off, but they do. They just,
Right.
in the end, we've saved thousands of dollars a year by doing this. The return on investment on our CO2 recovery is just 4 years. So it's pretty quick. And to boot, our quality of our CO2 is even better.
And you sound like you've learned a lot along the way too. I mean, these are things you probably didn't think about 5, 10, 20 years ago when you were starting this out. And technology is evolving, sustainability efforts are evolving. So it sounds like you've been quick to learn these things and also source from inside your staff. I mean, I know from when I worked there, I was just really excited to be around all these kind of really bright, cool minds in beer, from the lab techs to the brewers and everybody who I was a tour guide with. Everybody seemed to have something to offer and want to bring to Russian River.
Yeah, yeah, and we have 185 employees, and then add another 30 or 40 part-times during younger, and everyone's got to do their part, whether it's a dishwasher to a server to a bartender to a brewer to tour guide or admin, whatever it is, warehouse. Everyone's got to do their part, and to some degree, we had planned a lot. Like a lot of this stuff did just kind of happen, but like CO2 recovery, as an example, we planned it. When we built Windsor, we had a spot specifically that I laid out and we had designated for it. And it is gratifying when it comes together. We install the equipment and everything kind of fell into place exactly as we had thought. It doesn't always work that way, but this time it did, thankfully.
Now, how would you describe the identity of Sonoma County beer, and where does Russian River fit inside that story?
I'd say the identity is, mostly, local, independent, small. We're certainly not small anymore. I mean, if you live by the Brewers Association's definition, we are like the 48th biggest brewery. But, once you bring back in foreign owned craft breweries that were bought, albeit Stone, Bell's, New Belgium, Lagunitas, who's obviously local, then we're outside of the 50. But even if you add all of them back in, we're still like one of the 100 largest breweries in America. So we're certainly not small. Lagunitas isn't small. We are mostly all independent small businesses, minus Lagunitas, who's owned by Heineken. But they're still a great part of the beer community. And we recently had to reseed our wastewater treatment plant, and so we hired a local tank hauler, and we went and grabbed a few truckloads of wastewater effluent seed biology from Lagunitas. So there is still this great synergy and community between everyone here, whether it is Lagunitas or us or Cooperage, or it obviously wasn't great when Berry Public closed. That's unfortunately a part of the time in beer right now. But in general, and I think where Russian River sits, I think in a way we are kind of the face of Sonoma County, mainly because of Pliny the Elder, and Pliny the Younger draws a lot of people in. One of our greatest joys during the 2 weeks of Pliny the Younger is all the business that it brings, all the other breweries, the local wineries, the hotels, the airport, whatever. That's one of the coolest things that Natalie and I really are grateful and happy about with Pliny the Younger. And, we hope that people keep coming out every year. When we talk about Pliny the Younger, Natalie always says there's two things we can't control: the weather and how many people show up. And she's exactly right, and we don't know that. And one of these years, people may stop showing up for it, but that's what drives Natalie and I, and to really inspire our team to make sure that they're giving the best service, to obviously having the best beer, the best food, the best t-shirt merchandise, whatever. That's why Natalie and I spend so much time outside in the line talking to people at both breweries, to ensure that folks know that we really care and appreciate them coming out, and that they come out and wait, in line for our beer, because that doesn't happen in too many other breweries around the world anymore.
No, I was just about to say the days of waiting in line for these quote unquote hype releases is kind of over. But as I said at the kind of beginning my introduction, Pliny the Younger is part of the cultural fabric of Sonoma County, both for its residents and people that come here. And kind of dialing back before that a little, before the Pliny's plural, elder and younger, became a phenomenon, what did you want the brand of Russian River to represent to the public? Was there this vision before these two beers took off?
I don't know that we had a vision. I mean, out at Corbell, that was pretty early on still in craft, and that was definitely a downturn when Corbel opened the brewery in the late in 1997, and as I was the only employee for a while, I was just trying to focus on quality beer and make sure that we were putting the best beer out there. I've certainly grown as a brewer and now business owner, Natalie and I, and we become a lot more technical, and we're a lot more focused on the quality of the beer. And I think quality, safety, but above and beyond anything else, is the most important thing in our business. Brewing beer can be quite dangerous. There's hot water, there's steam, there's pressure, there's gases. I could go on and on.
Hoses on floors.
Heavy things. Yeah. And so, safety is number one. But after that, a lot of what drives our business and the decisions is quality. And so quality has always been a focus. It's never been about growth. We're definitely a slow growth, business. And, for us, it's more important than growth is to just be financially stable, and to expand isn't a reason to expand. Just to open another tap room isn't a reason to open another tap room. It's really interesting to see the contraction we're seeing in that. These breweries that, had opened multiple tap rooms, several of them are closing completely, or they're backing off from some of those tap rooms that they opened. So really, what was the purpose of doing that? So that's just another example of how, Natalie and I focus the way that we make decisions, and then that helps inspire our team to make decisions in a certain fashion as well.
Yeah, you've always been very intentional in my eyes. And no matter how many hundreds of comments you have on Facebook or other forums saying, bring beer to Minnesota, bring beer to these states, unfortunately, you can't just do it because all these people want you to do it. For some people out there who cry for your beer everywhere, but I know there's meticulousness and a method to your madness, as measured as it might be.
Yeah, there's only two markets on the East Coast that sell our beer. It's Philadelphia and Maine, but mostly Portland, Maine.
Yeah.
And Portland fell into we've always sold in Philly. Back in the early days, we wanted one East Coast market. Philly, to me, is one of, if not the best beer market in America, one of the best markets in America. I love it. It's a great beer drinking town. And it was close to DC, to Baltimore, to New York, train right away from all those places. So when we were there, when beer did arrive, folks really would come out and kind of clamor for it. Monk's Cafe is my favorite beer bar in America, so we've always partnered with them. And then when we grew into the Windsor brewery, it just made sense to add one more market out there. And we had done several events with Allagash Brewing in Portland, Maine. And so that's why we added it. In fact, Natalie and I were just there last week, and we ship a truck every quarter that splits between Maine and Philadelphia. And that's it. Otherwise, 80% of our beer is sold in California. We ship a little bit up to the Pacific Northwest, to Oregon and Washington, a little bit to Colorado, and then a very small amount to Nevada. But yeah, we're pretty much a California-driven brewery.
Which is great to find something that hyper local with the focus on wanting to get out to the consumers in your market. Now, bringing this back to Sonoma County a little bit, if Russian River Brewery really kind of is the face of Sonoma County beer or reflects Sonoma County, what traits of Sonoma County do you think show up in your beer? I mean, obviously ingredients and water source, but are there other things you do to make your beer more Sonoma County than maybe other breweries would, or if you were in more places?
I don't think we, make them that we're more Sonoma County. I just think we're also very community driven. And, I think Russian River 110 beer that I mentioned a few minutes ago is a good example of how we get back to the community. The name is intentional, and that the Russian River is 110 miles long from start to finish.
I was wondering where that came from.
That's where the name is from. And we tell that story on the label, and we tell the story of the support we're giving the Russian River Keeper. So I think that's a perfect example of, how we are a very Sonoma County driven brewery and business. Back in 2017 during the Tubbs fire, we were in the middle of building the Windsor brewery. We had just finished a promotion we had done many years before, where we raised money for local Sutter Breast Care Center, and we just didn't have the bandwidth to take it on. And then, of course, the Tubbs fire hit in October of 17, and we knew we couldn't just sit around, even though we had this giant brewery we were building. And, in the end, we took our Sonoma Pride beer and licensed the brand out to 60 other breweries. And all in, we raised $1.1 million for the local community.
That's
so
wonderful.
again, just another local way. But, all local breweries do events, festivals, nonprofit, that sort of thing. And, we've just been fortunate to be able to do a lot of stuff for the community and support organizations I already mentioned. We're big supporters of the Humane Society as well. Natalie and I are big lovers of animals, but specifically we're cat people, and that's another one of our favorite charities.
So when Pliny the Younger was first brewed, did you have any inkling that it would become such a phenomenon?
No, definitely not. As the story goes, when the Santa Rosa pub opened in 2004, April of 2004, the following winter, we were just as slow as we were when we opened, and we were looking for a way to drum up a little bit of business. At the time, most breweries would brew a barley wine, so a strong, malty, medium hopped, a higher alcohol beer. So the name refers to barley as in beer, but closer to the alcohol of wine. So they were 10 to 12% alcohol. Being a hop focused brewer, my idea was to try to take the Pliny the Elder recipe and basically push the limits of how much hops you could get into a beer while still being quite drinkable. So when it started, it was 11% alcohol. Nobody cared about it, stood in line for it the first 5 years. So from 2005, when it was first released, to 2009, it would be on through our anniversary in early April every year. So we'd always release it in early February, the first Friday of February. And then that next year, 2010, really changed Natalie and my life, our brewery's life. And that's when folks were lined up. It was 7 a.m. It was the first Friday of February. We had a few more phone calls. Hey, when are you going to have Pliny the Younger on? Said the date, whatever it was that year, that first Friday, February in 2010. It was 7 a.m. and there was probably 30 or 40 people outside. And after I tapped it and tasted it, which for me was more of kind of a ceremonial process I went through every year, because it had become a special beer to me, but not, I didn't think anything beyond that. And you could come in and fill growlers of it, so on and so forth. And I went out and asked,
Raoul or Pliny the
well,
Younger,
yeah,
man?
yeah. So I asked the folks what they were doing out there, and they said, "Well, we're waiting for you to open. We want to try Pliny the Younger. It's rated the best beer in the world." And I first said, "We don't open for 4 hours," and they said, "Yeah, we understand." And there were 3 hours, whatever it was, and I said, "By who? Who rated it?" And they mentioned these two websites, Rate Beer and Beer Advocate. And that was the beginning of the craziness of what Younger was. And we were number one on one of those websites and number two on the other as top beer in the world. And which is hard to believe, because the only way you could get it was mostly at our little pub and a few accounts that we distribute to out and about, in the Bay Area, and maybe a few kegs went to Southern California. But literally, as I'm standing there, the line got longer and longer, and I called Natalie and I said, "You better get down here. We need to bring everyone in." I said, "There's now a line of 100 people." And we had a limit of 4 growlers per person, and so a person could walk away with 2 gallons of beer, and so a group of 4 would walk out with 16 growlers. And in the course of 8 hours, we poured 20 barrels of beer, which is 620 gallons of beer, either by 10-ounce pour or by growler. And that first thing was, okay, we're never doing growlers again. We also came up with the idea, well, we need to stretch this out over 2 weeks so there isn't this giant rush that we're going to run out. And it took us a couple of years to figure out the allocations, but now we have a very firm grasp of how much we go through on draft. And now that we bottle it, which we've been bottling for a few years, we know pretty much how many bottles you need to go through in a day. It's a 3 bottle limit per person now. It's a 2.5 hour table limit. It's 3 10-ounce draft pours of Younger. There's a whole wristband that happens, and on that wristband is 4 tabs, 3 tabs for your 3 glasses of Younger, the fourth tab if you want to buy bottles. So it's a pretty much a well-oiled machine. We still try to improve it every year, and I think we do. But a lot of it is line culture, and the line is really the event and the happening. And once you get inside, it's business as normal. But we also brew a bunch of other one-off beers, special beers that we'll have on as well. Obviously, Pliny the Younger is what people are coming for, but we try to curate a beer list that's unique and is diverse between Belgian beers and sour wild beers to obviously hoppy beers to our lagers and a few styles in between.
I mean, your Velvet Glow lager is one of my favorite lagers I've had in a long time, and that's just one
Thank
of
you.
those ones that I could always keep coming. And I
Yeah.
should say, I always keep coming back to. I do always keep coming back to it. So
Yeah.
that's one of
Well,
those
thank
things
you.
that you create an experience for people. And talking about that a little bit, when you see people standing in line, you were seeing people come to Russian River, the pub or the brewery, and stand in line for hours. Has it become more than just about chasing a beer, or is it participating in something communal? Like what do people come for? You talk to people all this time. What do they say they're here for?
Yeah, so one of our favorite things for Natalie and I to do is to go out and walk the line. We walked the line multiple times at both breweries every day during the 14 days of Younger. Thankfully, we're grateful, humbled, and flattered that folks is pretty much aligned the whole time, and that they will wait for our beer. We certainly do not take that for granted, and hence what I mentioned earlier, just trying to always do better, make better beer, higher quality beer, better flavor profile, even tighter than the year before, food quality, service, all that stuff. But when you look at the line, obviously the beer is what draws people in, but the line then becomes this communal thing. There's this book that we read a few years ago called The Holy Man's Journey, and it's about people that wait in line to meet the holy man, and it's the journey of getting through this line. And the book is about all the stories and things that happen to different folks that are waiting in line. And once they get inside, and they meet the holy man, it's kind of business as normal. They find out he's just like this regular dude. And that's in a way a parallel to this.
Vinny the
And
Holy Man.
and it's not, and Natalie and I don't mean it that way. It's
No, I
just that
know.
the path that you take and the line, and then you meet people in line, and maybe you didn't know each other, but because you're in line for a couple few hours, you get to know each other. You start talking about your kids, your family, whatever. We have groups that met in line that now meet up every year because they became friends. I remember a story about a young couple that sent us a wedding announcement, and it was a picture of them. They were kind of both in these cool retro suit, and she was in her wedding dress, and they were holding elder bottles. This is before we bottled Younger, and they told us the story that they had met in line, and one of them was on their own and one was with a group. And when it came up to their time to get in the door, they had one extra seat at the table because it was like an odd sized group. It was like a group of three and one. And so they ended up all just sitting together, and this couple ended up, hitting it off. They exchanged phone numbers, started dating, and they eventually got engaged and were getting married. And that was the announcement that we read that they sent us, and all from being in line at Younger. So
That's
that's
so
just one
cool.
of like dozens of stories that Natalie and I have heard over the years. And so it is probably as much communal as it is the beer. The beer is obviously what brings people here, but they wouldn't keep coming back and waiting in line for hours, sometimes 1 hour, sometimes 7 or 8 hours. In the day, it was up to 12 hours. They wouldn't keep coming back if it wasn't great beer, great food, great service, all those things that we are focused on. But the line is pretty fun, and it's surprising. People would say like, "Oh, why? I don't understand why people would wait in line." But it's like, why did you wait in line for an iPhone?
Right.
Like that's, well, because it's unique, and it was really cool, and you don't have to do that anymore. Obviously our beer has a shelf life, and your iPhone lasts for years. But yeah, it really does become that's the event, and that's the people enjoy. And once you get inside, you're kind of rewarded with the great service that we give, and the beer, and so on and so forth. And Natalie and I are super nervous this time of year. We worry that people aren't going to show up, that less people are going to show up, that we've done all this prep, we've brewed all this beer based on historical data, we've printed all these t-shirts and merch and staffing and all this stuff. And then what if people don't show up? It's like Natalie says, that's one of the two things we can't control, that or the weather. A lot of our staff probably doesn't understand those nerves and those angst that we have, but they are real, and we feel a lot better, once we get into Younger and folks are here and they're enjoying it. And if that year ever comes, then we're going to have to pivot, in
Right.
what we do. So, and if that happens, we'll be ready. In the meantime, we'll keep doing what we're doing, and hopefully it brings that amazing economic impact, not just to us and our team, but to Sonoma County, which I think 2024 was the last economic impact study we did with Sonoma County, and it was $8.6 million was the
That's amazing.
2 week economic impact. So it really that event really does support the community financially, and so it is important to us to hopefully it keeps going after all these years and continues on.
Yeah, when did you first realize people were traveling specifically because of Pliny? Was there a moment? Was there a year where other businesses were reporting back to you? Talk to us a little bit about how that kind of came to your attention.
It was probably in 2011, because 2010 was that year
That was the
when we were
boom
still
year.
doing growlers, and that was the first year. And Natalie and I literally had drilled a hole in the back of the cold box in Santa Rosa and ran a tap through, tied into the tank at another valve so we could fill growlers. And one of our
Wow.
now warehouse team, who was just a customer at the time, but a friend, happened to come in for beer, and I pulled him in, and he ended up helping me fill growlers for hours off the back. So Natalie was at the front bar filling growlers, beer. And so that year we didn't know where people were coming from. But the next year, Natalie and I started going out every morning and walking in line and talking to people. And just through that, we learned where they were from, and be like, yeah, we get home, and we'd be sharing a glass of wine or beer and be like, I met someone from Tokyo today, or she's like, well, I met someone from the Netherlands. And then we started tracking that a little bit, and then eventually we started doing the economic impact study with the county, which I don't remember the first year we did that, but the first year we did the economic impact study, it was like $1.2 million or something. It was legitimate money, but not like it is now.
And as you
It's
said,
grown. So
2024 was $8.6 million, something around that.
yeah,
So, I
yeah,
mean, that's
yeah,
that's grown so much
yeah,
in,
yeah.
11, 12 years. And then, hopefully there's no let up, because as I've seen from both sides of it, coming to it and being on the other side of it, people just have a great time. And I think that's one of those great things about beer and craft beverages in general is the experience people have over a common love for a product, for a story, and creating their own stories. And that's something that I know Russian River does well.
Yeah, thanks.
And, especially being a leader in the industry, do you feel some sort of responsibility to the broader craft beer ecosystem here, like especially smaller breweries?
Yeah, Natalie and I are definitely feel like, there were certainly people that helped us early on and still do help us. When we built the Windsor Brewery in 2017 and into 18, we went to so many of our friends' breweries to check out, what they did and how they did it. Ken Grossman from Sierra Nevada was just amazing being a mentor. He's always been a mentor to us, but in so many ways, but as much as like just how do you build a brewery of this scale, do it right, and so on and so forth. So, to then give back is certainly important to us. Natalie and I were just in Portland, Maine, because she was the keynote speaker at their local craft beer conference, and we've both been the keynote speaker at the National Craft Brewers Conference. Natalie sits on the board for the California Craft Brewers Association. She's actually on it for the second round. She was on it previous. So, I mean, all these things are a part of giving back. And, if a local brewery needs to use our labs to run some beer, whatever, we're happy to do that. As I know Lagunitas would be too.
Sure.
Lagunitas has a pretty tight and sophisticated lab, and I know that both of us would be happy to run beer. In fact, I remember when Cooperage got their canning line, Tyler would drive beer up, and we had figured out that what dissolved oxygen the beer would take up in the 15 minutes it would take to get his beer here. And so then we could run the cans for him and then give him a semblance of what, the cans were on the total package oxygen. That's just a small example, but we're always happy to give back because so many people helped us.
And here's a think piece question here for you, Vinny. What's harder, building a legendary brand or maintaining one?
Oh, I think probably maintaining it. The building it, you can't plan for it. It just happens. I always use the example of the iPhone. Steve Jobs probably never imagined that he probably hoped everybody, that's an entrepreneur hopes that their business turns into something unique and that's memorable. But I don't think he could have ever guessed or imagined the impact that the iPhone would have had on not just people and culture, but other companies that were trying to replicate it. That's a perfect example. And same with beer. Like you can't just build a brand and then try to turn it into some cult kind of following of a beer or whatnot that people line up for or travel around the world to seek. I think a good example is Treehouse on the East Coast. Like they couldn't have imagined that their hazy IPA they brewed, would have people lined up wanting to buy flats and flats of it. It just kind of has to happen organically. And then once you have it, then you have to figure out how to keep it going and stay focused. But for us, again, it comes down to quality. That's the foundation.
And going along with that, how do you protect authenticity as you grow? Like, how do you decide what to say no to? I know you're very intentional with some things. You're not expanding into 40 states, let alone 12 states. Are there ways you go ahead and protect that authenticity?
I think you kind of answered the question in itself, is that we are very intentional. And Natalie and I have never been, even though our business has grown into a decent sized brewery, we've never just grown to grow. It's been, okay, we had one big growth spurt because we built this beautiful, amazing brewery, but we have to pay the loan off. But after that, we went back to our, 2-3% growth a year. And so it is just not being sucked into wanting to just grow and add a market and add tanks that then adds more debt, which maybe puts you in unstable ground. So where your debt ratio is too high, and and then you're seeing the results of it now, which is a lot of breweries closing, unfortunately, for whatever reason. I think just intentional is the best way to describe how we run our business, so that we are being focused on what our goals are. We have very clear goals of who we are and what we want to do and where we want to be. And sometimes that can happen quicker, or sometimes it's slower, and you have to be adaptable to the situation.
And speaking of where you want to be, after everything you've accomplished, from awards, global recognition to lines around the block, what's left for Vinnie, Natalie, and Russian River Brewing to accomplish?
Well, right now we're just focused on quality beer and paying our debt. That's
Two important things,
that's a
absolutely.
goal, is to eventually be, debt free and not have that hanging over us. We're very lucky that we are able to buy out all of our investors in 2014 and 2016. And it is just Natalie and I, and we did it with a bank loan. We don't have any multinational or international brewery behind us funding us. We don't have a private equity or, whatever helped us with the money. It's just a traditional bank loan and cash flow that we run our business on. So that's personal goal for us. And in the meantime, I'll just keep having great employee engagement and public engagement and quality and all those things. It seems really basic, but where beer is at, it's really what the focus should be for every brewery. And focus on what you do best. Don't get out of your lane. As about the farthest we've ever gone is with hop water, which we have on tap and canned, but we don't make seltzer or RTD drinks or this, that, or the other. Nothing against those things. That's just not who we are. We're a beer focused brewery, and that's really what we do best. And we focus on IPA. We have, secondary to that now is lagers, and tertiary to that would be our sour beers and Belgian beers. And that's really our focus. If we could make a non-alcoholic beer that we could serve just in our pubs, I'm okay with that, to have something we made ourselves, but I wouldn't want to just make one to have it taste like everyone else's. Prefer it, to represent who we are, and that's something we haven't been able to do because they are very difficult to make. So in the meantime, we're happy to sell Firestone's, 805 NA beer. It's super tasty. They're friends of ours. It supports friends, and that's just an example of like being very intentional of who we are.
Now, one more before we get to our lightning round here. For our listeners who might have any questions about some insider tips for the Pliny the Younger release and weeks ahead, what can you tell our listeners about, just the inside scoop? Any insider secrets here?
Yeah, what the oddest one that has come up is, for many years, the weekends were always the busiest days. And randomly, the first Friday and Saturday and the second Friday and Saturday, so the two, the sets of Friday and Saturday are both very busy. But randomly, that first Sunday, which this year will be March 22nd, is actually a pretty slow day. There's still a line, but the last 2 years, and particularly actually at both breweries, the line has been rather short. And I think it's because we do often get a lot of news coverage on
Mhm.
that first Friday, unless there's some major news story that we get preempted by. And, with that, I think people kind of psych themselves out and they say, well, I'm not going to come out on the weekend because the news said it's going to be really busy. But I'd say the biggest insider tip is that first Sunday has routinely the last couple of years been slow. I'm air quoting slow as younger goes, but instead of a 4 or 6 hour wait, it was like I remember last year it was like an hour and a half wait,
Okay.
maybe 2 hours, and
That's a
maybe
big
not.
that's a big difference maker for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and in those days, Natalie and I are like, well, maybe this is the year it's going to slow down. And then the next day, so the fourth day of Younger last year, the first Monday was absolutely bonkers. It was like a 6 hour, 7 hour wait. So it is unpredictable, but that's the best I can give you. If you're downtown in Santa Rosa, there is local amenities. There's obviously local coffee shops and restaurants if you want to go grab a bite to eat while you're waiting in line. Whereas in Windsor, there isn't anything. We do have a coffee truck there on the weekends, and sometimes one of our employees shows up with tamales or something to sell. But in Windsor, you need to be a little more self-contained. Bring a lawn chair, to sit in, that sort of thing. And just to be comfortable, if you do decide to be one of the ones that show up super early, if you're from out of the area, you know that Sonoma County is quite cool and in
Bring
the mornings,
layers.
and that's why the grapes grow good here. What I always say, I bring layers, and if you tend to get bored, bring some board games or games you can play on your phone or iPad, whatever. All those little things. We have water
Yeah.
out, for at both places. On the weekends, we'll put some donuts and coffee out as well in Santa Rosa. And so those are just little extras that we try to do. But yeah, if you come out, hopefully Natalie and I can meet you in line, and just thank you for coming out. We do appreciate everyone coming out.
And for those of you who have never gone to the pubs before, maybe you have, here's a little insider tip from your host. Hey, if you're at Windsor, get the burger. It's one of the best burgers that I have had, and get the Pliny fries with the burger. You need something to stand up to all of that amazing Pliny the Younger. And I've had it this year. I had it over at Hot Monk Tavern a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
It's delicious. Get the burger with the cheddar fondue and get the Pliny fries. And if you're down at 4th Street, get the Pliny Bites. There's
Yeah.
nothing better than Pliny Bites. So, as a way to balance out all that delicious beer and some insider tips for eats from your host,
Yeah.
Vinny, as we set to wrap up here, we like to do a little lightning round on This Must Be the Place before I
Yep.
go to crack one open. So, I have a few for you. Don't think too hard. Just give me the
Yep.
first things that come to mind. Starting with something easy. First beer you ever loved?
Definitely Liberty Ale.
Liberty
I
Ale.
would give Sierra Nevada Pale Ale a close second, but I remember Liberty being that first hoppy beer that just made me go, wow, this is amazing flavor. And this is what I want to do. I want to first homebrew and eventually open a brewery.
Most underrated beer style?
A Saison for sure.
Thank
One of
you.
my favorite beer styles. In fact, as you were talking about the inside tips on Younger, one other thing I was going to say was, A, don't forget about the rest of the beers on the
Mhm.
board. And the seasoned veteran folks that come to Younger often won't have Younger as their first beer. They know they have 2.5 hour table limit. So that's a long time.
Yeah.
And taste through some of the other lighter beers first, because once you've had Younger, it's tough to go back. Even to Pliny the Elder, makes Elder taste really light. But one of the beers I'm most excited about for this year's Younger release, and I just tasted it for the first time yesterday, something I brewed in the pilot brewery, and we call it Petit Robert. We take our Robert Saison recipe, which is a classic farmhouse ale, and we've made a small version of it in the pilot brewery. And it's 3% alcohol, and it's an absolute beautiful, light, crisp. It's got this beautiful kind of jasmine floral note to it. I'm really excited for this beer. I know people show up for Younger, but I'm fired up for this 3%
I'd
beer.
forgotten about Petit Robert, and now
Yeah,
you
we've
put
only
that.
made it once or twice in the
Yeah.
past, and those were always a bit of a half-ass attempt at making a table beer, as it's called in Belgium. My goal was 3.5%, and we're at 3%. So the idea is for it to hover between 3 and 3.5%. So I'm pretty excited for that. So but that's a tie into the question of
Absolutely.
most underrated style saison. This
And
is
I'm right
basically a
there with
small
you.
saison.
I'm right there with you. So here's a big one for you. Beer trend you hope sticks.
Probably lagers have
Yeah.
finally stuck, and I'm 15%, so 15% of our volume production is lager now. When we opened Windsor, it was 0% or unmeasurable. I mean, we made STS randomly at the pub. It was a passion project, but I like the lower alcohol, and I hope that folks keep drinking these lagers. I also hope that trend in the direction of lower alcohol hoppy beers like Russian River 110, which is a West Coast Pils. So that's a, body and mouthfeel of a Pilsner, but the hops of an IPA. For us, I don't think Pliny the Elder is going anywhere,
Right.
but it is great to diversify. And as you get older, maybe you can't drink as much or you don't want as high of alcohol.
For those
Or
of
if,
you who can't see, I'm raising my hand here.
yeah,
'Cause
and
yeah.
or if you're a family, if you're a parent, mom or dad, and you can't have as high of an alcohol beer,
Yeah.
these lower alcohol beers. So I hope this trend in low to mid range alcohol beers continues.
And you might not be able to answer me this, but over the last few months, I've seen this thing called R&D Czech dark lager floating around some of the Russian River places where, Russian River Pub, Windsor. Might there be a third lager in 12-ounce cans coming down the pipeline to flesh out that STS Pills and Velvet
Y-
Cloak family?
Yeah, we did. We make a dark lager, not necessarily a Czech style, but
There.
yeah, dark lager, and that's just been a one-off project. It's not anything more than that. Right now, there's no plans to go beyond the two classic lagers.
Fair enough.
Obviously
Fair.
we
I was just curious here.
brought in the West Coast Pills as a hoppy,
And that's
lager,
fantastic too. Yeah.
but that'll just stay as a one-off draft beer probably.
All right. On the other side of the beer trend you hope sticks, the beer trend you hope fades.
Gosh,
The one you're glad that faded away.
I've kind of grown past like saying I don't particularly care for a style or whatever. Like I hear a lot of brewers, especially back in the day, a lot of brewers that made classic barrel aged sour wild beer like we make really talk down on quick sour beers, kettle
Mhm.
sour beers. And I personally always looked at kettle sour beers as like entry gateway beers to
Yep.
hopefully people start out with those. They are simpler flavors, and then hopefully they work up to, a wild beer like our Funky Fooder series or, Temptation, Supplication, Consecration, what we're most known for in that, realm of beers. So I don't know that I have something that I just, happy that it went away or want to see go away. I think we need to be more inclusive as a beer industry. So I may not be making pastry stouts or milkshake style beers or hazy beers that literally look like a yeast pitch. I don't even know how to do that, but that's fine. If there's a market for it, yeah, it's no,
And if it
more
gets people drinking and talking.
more power to it. I mean, if anything, what I want to see go away is maybe people drinking less at home and going out,
Mhm.
getting more social. Beer and wine and it's a social lubricant if you can. It gets people out and to bars, restaurants, being communal, hanging out. And, that's one of the things we love about Younger, and hopefully it keeps going.
Now, one more for you here, Vinny. What's your most surreal Pliny the Younger moment or memory? Is there anything that sticks out to you other than maybe that couple who met and sent you the wedding announcement?
Yeah, that was pretty cool. It's probably walking out on that first Friday, February, and in 2010, and seeing people lined up for our beer. That was definitely a first. I'd never had that happen before, hadn't seen it. I had heard of a couple other beers from the Midwest and East Coast that had imperial IPAs like Dark Lord from Three Floyds, and there's a couple others, but no, that was definitely the most surreal moment, and still the most flattering and humble thing is that Natalie and I see is
I
for someone to line up for our beer. And like I said earlier, we don't take it for granted. Absolutely not. It's something that drives us and makes us be a little bit paranoid that it's not going to be there. And so we want to do whatever we can to, hopefully validate the amazing service, beer, quality, everything that the customers hopefully get when they come in.
Well, you've certainly built something beautiful, not only for beer lovers, but for Sonoma County, for people who come from far, who come from nearby. I just encourage everybody out there, get out there between March 20th and April 2nd. Go enjoy Pliny the Younger, whether it's your first time or your 17th time. Thank you so much, Vinnie, for being on This Must Be the Place. This was such a fantastic conversation. And I just wish you the best of luck with the next couple weeks ahead. I know how crazy it can be.
Well, thanks. I appreciate you having me on, and I look forward to seeing you in the pub next time you're in.
Absolutely.
And yeah, again, thanks for thinking of us for this. Appreciate it.
Not a problem. Viewers, listeners, stick around. I'm about to crack one open as the debate between Blind Pig and Pliny the Elder rages on and turns to you. So stay tuned for the next segment. And thanks again, Vinnie. Cheers.
Cheers.
The interviews are done, which means I think it's time to crack one open. Interviews make me thirsty, and I want you thirsting for knowledge about some great beer, both local and not so local. Each week, I'll introduce you to a beer I find discussion-worthy and explain the nuances of what makes it fantastic in my eyes and why you should give it a try. And just to keep it on point, I'll even try to make sure the beer reflects the vibe or theme of the episode.
I mean, what a time to be alive. Getting to chat with Vinnie of Russian River in advance of their Pliny the Younger release. If only I had a bottle to be cracking open with you right now. That may come. For now, I'm going to talk about their other two core beers and hope to pick up some insight from our listeners out there. When it comes to Blind Pig versus Pliny the Elder, which reigns supreme? Now, Elder for me is a staple. I don't drink many double IPAs anymore these days, but when I do, it's Pliny the Elder. It's just a showcase of what Vinnie does best, absolute balance. A beer that, in my opinion, tastes a percentage point or so down a notch from its 8% alcohol by volume. An OG beer that helped build Russian River into what it is today. Akin to a Pilsner being poured at a German beer hall, there's nothing more perfect than settling down at the Russian River pub bar with a sparkling pint of Pliny and some pizza on the way. Now, Blind Pig at 6.5% ABV is another exquisite IPA and a true throwback to Vinnie's roots. I don't drink this one as frequently, and when I crack one open for this segment, I notice it's changed a bit. That's also not a bad thing. The IPA world has evolved, and this beer reflects that. A bit less bracingly bitter and a bit more aromatic, softer on the palate, and using two newer hop varietals that have come up over the last few years. Every bit more drinkable than Elder, and perhaps to some, more relatable. What do you say out there, listeners? Are you partial to Pliny or Pig? Leave a comment in the podcast once you've listened, and let's see if we can settle this debate. Thanks so much to Vinnie for hanging out and talking beer with me on this week's episode of This Must Be the Place. Cheers from your host.
This Must Be the Place is produced by our friends at Pod Locally, an audio platform helping local voices connect to their communities. Don't forget to like, subscribe, or comment on all your favorite podcast apps, and visit the show notes for more information, links, and resources. Look out for our next drop on Sunday. Until then, I'm your host, Alo Galinsky, saying have a great week.